What if Deku had an ice quirk? Now, what if that ice quirk was like 100 times more powerful than any ice quirk in the My Hero Academia? And by that, I mean freezing entire tsunamis, encasing people in blocks of thick ice, and having the overall ability of just being ice yourself, controlling it to a degree where you almost feel like a god in the territory of ice. That's literally what Deku's going to be having in this what if. And if you guys enjoy overpowered, very just like crazy what ifs with that feel like a little bit more of slice of life, you're definitely going to enjoy this one. That said, leave a like if you guys going to enjoy the video, and also share the video with a friend. But with all that out of the way, enjoy.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
Alright, where should this what if even start? I know that much like you guys are probably sitting there like, oh, he already has his game plan. But nah, I'm gonna be honest, I decided to just go full like freehand, no script on this video, and I don't even know what I'm about to do. So me and you are both experiencing this what if for the first time. No script this time around, and I'm kind of just gonna be basing most of Izuku's attacks off of everything we've seen from Aokiji, such as Ice Age and his abilities to shoot little lances at people and turn people into complete statues of ice. I think that that's the dopest part of his powers. But how should he get these powers? Should I just use anime BS and just give him the powers via, you know, anime BSery and basically have it so that just because he's his reincarnation, he gets his powers? Or should I have Izuku end up finding a, you know, Logia devil fruit? Now, there's a couple of ways that I could go about it, but I think that the way that I'm going to be using this time around, just because I kind of don't really feel like creating some convoluted storyline, we're just going to be using the anime BS, alright? So, because Deku is going to be Aokiji's reincarnation, let's just say that his soul carries on his powers and that Deku just so happens to inherit it. Now, does this mean he's going to inherit some of Aokiji's personality? Absolutely, of course. Like, this wouldn't be what if Deku had Aokiji's powers if it wasn't. But, you know, obviously with that comes Deku being more of a nonchalant person and more of a like just doing what he thinks is right? Like, he's going to be kind of having a little bit of that Kizaru personality mixed in with his own. And when it comes to his hair color, I'm just going to be saying that instead of having that green tint in his hair, I kind of want him to have white hair. So I'm going to be having him take after his father, Hisashi, and he's going to be having white hair in this series just because it's like ice, white hair. Like, I don't know, it just fits. Come on now, we got Elsa, we got Jack Frost, we got, who else is a dude with ice powers that has white hair? Not a lot, but yeah, you guys get the point, right? But regardless of the fact, we basically get an Izuku this time around growing up, not exactly knowing that he has this power, but also knowing that he has something. And eventually, once he gets to the age of 4 years old and he's coherent enough to kind of understand what he's doing and like try to pretty much like use powers or try anything and everything, he would eventually one day when he's about 4 years old end up kind of realizing why it is that he was never able to get into pools and stuff like that. Well, now he finally hit the mark and why he's never been able to really take damage. He finds out that it's because he has ice powers. Always found it strange that wherever Deku went, ice and cold usually followed, and it was always something strange that people weren't able to put 50-50 together with. But now that he's 4 years old, he finally showed the ability to be able to freeze things. When Inko ended up getting home and, you know, she sees Izuku on the counter, she sees Izuku in the living room, right? And Hisashi is there like trying to defrost everything, and Izuku's like, I have ice powers, I have ice powers. Like he's just cheering in excitement, right? But we got Inko walking into the house of, you know, like her nice house, and it's just like, it's frozen. And Izuku's just sitting there like cheering, just going absolutely bazonkers because it's like, bro, like froze everything. Like that's kind of cool when you really stop and think about it. But I mean, Inko's not stopping to think about that right now. She just cares about the fact that her whole house got frozen. But regardless of the fact, they take Izuku to the quirk doctor and they pretty much find out that Izuku has the perfect ice quirk. The only downside is that Izuku can't be submerged underwater, because if he is, he kind of just loses all of his strength and power, And even though he's not going to just die, it is something that is pretty much going to be giving him weakness. Salt water is the thing that mainly affects him, and they end up finding out that if you use like a certain material, you could actually damage Izuku. But with nobody knowing that Sea Prism even exists in this world, there is literally going to be nothing stopping Izuku. Nobody in the My Hero Academia world has Haki, and even though he can take tangible damage, unlike many other Logias, the ice can simply reform itself. So Izuku is kind of a god in this series. I'm not even gonna lie to you guys. Imagine having the ability to like just not be hurt, unless you have Haki or Sea Prism Stone, which is something nobody's really gonna find out. And he just grows up with Bakugo, and Bakugo always like at the beginning tried to like see if he could beat Izuku and be like, oh, like I'll be better than you when my quirk gets. He finally gets it, and it's like every time that he tried to like defeat Izuku, he just got absolutely mollywopped. Like of course he landed an explosion, but Izuku just reformed it and was like, Bakugo, stop. And Bakugo like could never hurt Izuku. He was never sure why. But eventually he stopped trying to be better than Izuku and just understood that, you know, he's not the best and Izuku is probably gonna be the best. So for their childhood, Izuku was usually the one who would be hit with all the praise, and this would lead Izuku to develop a little bit of a nonchalant, like cocky attitude, where it's like he's kind of like the star player, like where he like doesn't really try for anything unless he really has to, you know what I mean? Like unless he's told, hey dude, start trying, you know what I mean? And so Izuku was always kind of popular at school. He always had all the girls, and he always had like all the dudes like wanting to hang out with him and stuff like that. He had all the dudes. But anyways, Izuku basically goes on to live his life just like me and you, right? He goes to school, and eventually middle school would come around the corner. Now, once middle school does come around the corner, this is when things slightly begin to change for him, because one day, right, Deku would pretty much be asked by Bakugo if they're gonna hang out today, and Deku would just be like, I'm gonna take a rain check, gotta go hang out with my mom. It's her birthday, right? And you know, he grabs his stuff in his notebook and stuff, and he's still a little bit of a brainiac when it comes to studying people's abilities and how to counter them, but you know, it doesn't really like, you know, matter. But regardless, ladies and gentlemen, we do have Izuku essentially walking over towards the direction of the underground tunnel. And, you know, he's walking, right? And eventually the sludge villain leeches onto him, and it's like, I got you, kid. Give me your body, right? Like he begins to use that strange voice that he has and just like begin telling him that like he didn't know that the freak was in town, aka All Might. And Izuku's like, All Might's in town. Interesting. And, you know, like the sludge villain was like, what? And it realizes that Izuku's not even there. Like that was a ice clone. And the sludge villain just looks at Izuku and is like, what are you? And Izuku is practically like still walking away. Now the sludge villain, before it can realize what's going on, would just be turned to ice. And Izuku would have already turned the corner and walked pretty decent distance away with the sludge villain just being frozen in ice. All Might would tap it and be like, here? And, you know, he's like, okay, so this is going to be interesting. And now he has to wait for the sludge villain to melt, but the authorities could take that ice sculpture and imprison him in that state that he was currently in. And Izuku just literally walks home, and there is no altercation that day. He doesn't even get gifted All for One by All Might or anything. I mean, One for All. And All Might essentially ends up having to like continue searching for a successor, and because he's not going to be giving it to Bakugo, because I don't really feel like he deserves it in this what if, I'm just going to be saying that he still just gives it to Mirio just like he would have in the original. And that means that there's going to be two very, very powerful heroes in the series, but Bakugo's never truly going to catch up to Deku's level, no matter how hard he realistically tries. During the 10-month training period, Izuku would kind of just relax, honestly, not train at all. He just goes to school, watches YouTube, he watches Xehther's videos, and he pretty much is just chilling. He's vibing, right? And he just kind of does his thing, right? And eventually the day of the entrance exams would arrive. Now, the day of the entrance exams, Izuku does go, right? Like Inko drops him off and she's like, I love you, right? And Izuku's like, love you too, mom. He walks in, right? And, you know, he takes a test and he's not even muttering this time. He's just looking at present Mike. And Ida just like looks at like Izuku and like gives him like a strange stare, but Izuku doesn't care. He finishes his test and he walks outside after Ida got called out for being a brainiac. And then after that, he's pretty much just waiting by the back of everybody, just kind of waiting for President Mike to finally announce that they could begin. Izuku gets kind of tired of waiting, and so he decides to go more towards the front of the line. But once he does, this is when Ida would stop him and be like, hey, and Izuku looks back at him and he's like, oh buddy, what's up, what do you want? And Ida's like, you can't go talk to that girl. And Izuku's like, I wasn't going to, but now that you mention it, she is kind of cute. And Ida's like, what do you mean? And Izuku's like, all right, buddy, well, our little chit chat's done. And Ida just looks at Izuku, and Izuku's just already over by Uraraka talking to her, and he's like, oh, that damn kid, right? Eventually, though, right as Izuku's telling Uraraka his name and stuff like that and introducing himself, President Mike says that the battle can begin, right? Now, immediately, as soon as this starts, Izuku would proceed to essentially like blitz right at the direction of the robots, and as soon as he enters the area with nobody else there, mind you, nobody else is in the vicinity, right? Izuku simply slams his foot down onto the ground and says, Ice Age, as suddenly literally one like half of the literal all the beginning of the robot portion is all covered in ice, the whole thing. Aokiji in the original stopped the whole tsunami, so I think that he could definitely do this with the powers of the Hiei no Mi, alright? So Izuku's able to stomp and literally just freeze half of the obstacles that were there. This would lead him to getting hundreds of points, and Nezu and all the teachers alike being absolutely shocked. They've never seen anything like this. Ida and everybody else who was watching it would be like, how did he? And Izuku would like let out like cold air from his breath, right? Like it would be cold, and like half of his face would be covered in ice, but Izuku wouldn't care because it's like he is ice, right? And it's like he finna give Uraraka that icy smile, right? And Uraraka looks at him and she's like, what? And Izuku just looks back at her and he's like, here. And he grabs her by the hand, and bro literally proceeds to use the ultimate Riz and just start like ice skating. He creates ice skates on her feet. And after this, like they begin to skate towards the direction of where everything isn't melted, and they make it over there. And Izuku's like, all right, destroy those robots. And Uraraka just goes in and she like begins to make stuff float, right? And because she was really the only one that does stuff, she actually ends up getting in. Ida obviously began to like run in there as fast as he could and begin trying to destroy robots as much as he could, but it was just hard. And so Izuku and Uraraka were really the only ones that passed that day. Everybody else had to come back 3 days, a week later, because it stayed frozen for a while, right? And after that happens, Ida is just like, all right, don't mess with that kid. And pretty much what ends up happening is Izuku and Uraraka get their acceptance letters, and so does Bakugo, with him saying that he saw how his half of the portion got literally frozen. Izuku is like, yeah, had to show off a little bit. There was a cute girl there. And Bakugo's like, are you serious? You did that because there was a girl? Like, bro, you could have just went in and just destroyed robots single-handedly, like individually. And Izuku's like, that was too much work. I ended up getting about 200 robot points doing what I did anyways. And Bakugo is just like, all right then. I mean, yeah, I can't really argue with that. I can argue with your methods, but not your results. And so they both continue playing video games at Bakugo's house, and Katsuki's mom is like, Bakugo, get down here or I'll kill you. And Bakugo's like, fuck mom. And he like comes down with Izuku, and Izuku's just there like, hey Miss Katsuki. And she's like, don't call me that, Izuku, your family here. And he's like, yeah. He then begins to eat the pasta she makes, and then everybody kind of just ends up passing out. Izuku spends the night at Bakugo's before school starts, and Katsuki would be the one who has his mom actually take them to UA. So they end up arriving around the same time, and Izuku would end up sitting right next to Bakugo, right at the edge of, like literally right at the back of the class. That's where Izuku's at. He has his feet on top of the desk. He like has like a book over his face, and he's just trying to sleep. He's trying to get a nap in, right? And Bakugo just sitting there like cockily just scrolling through his phone until Ida just walks up, and he like just can't stand seeing these two like live their best life, right? And he just walks up and he's like, what are you guys doing? You guys know you're disrespecting UA property? I should do something about this. I can't let you guys do this. You know, he just begins being a whole teacher's pet, right? And immediately Izuku, like, he pretty much like looks at Ida and like he picks the book off of his face and he's like, dude, be quiet. I'm trying to sleep. And, you know, a little bit of ice comes off of his breath. And, you know, he then blows at Ida with his like icy breath. And it like kind of like pushes Ida back, also making the classroom a lot colder than it was before. And this would cue Aizawa to wake up since his temperature was already ruined. Now Aizawa wakes up and he's like, oh, damn it. He then is like, all right, took you guys this many seconds to settle down. And he then pretty much tells the classroom to go get changed into the UA outfits and meet him outside. Everybody does so after a little bit of protest from people asking about UA's orientation, but eventually they all get the memo that Aizawa doesn't care about that kind of stuff. And so they do go on to take the Quirk apprehension test. Now, this I would say would go just like the original, which it does for everybody else except for Izuku and Bakugo, since I'm going to say he's a little stronger since he was trying a lot harder to catch up to him. But, you know, it wouldn't be that much of a monumental difference to make it so like everything changes, right? But it definitely is a significant increase that Aizawa is very, very, you know, proud of and stuff like that. One person that definitely takes note of Izuku's powers is Todoroki. Just watching the way that Izuku moved and the way that he carried himself kind of made Todoroki like kind of think about his older brother, Toya. Or no, not Toya. He didn't have fire. He didn't have ice. He had fire. No, but he just thinks of like his sister. I think his sister has like an ice power, I believe. Yeah, right, maybe. I'm not sure. But regardless, you know, he kind of thinks about that. And Izuku is just kind of there and he's doing his thing and he ends up getting really good markings on everything. I mean, you know, we have the ball throw, and for that, I'm thinking that Izuku's going to be creating like an arrow, like a bow and arrow made out of ice. And like he pulls it back. Wait, it's out of ice. How would he even like pull the thing? Okay, no, he throws the ball up into the air, creates a bat, and then bam, like hits it into the air. And after that, he shoots like lances right at the direction of the ball as it's mid-air, and it just like goes straight through the ball and it like sends it flying even further. After that, Izuku lets everybody else go next, and he gets a worse score than Bakugo at that one just because that's not really his strong suit, throwing things far. But for the 50-meter dash, he pretty much breaks everybody else's records because he's just that fast. And when it comes to his you know, his side-to-side stuff, he uses his eyes to just slip off, and it's pretty cool to watch Izuku clear these events. His physical strength and his overall endurance is actually very, very competent, and Aizawa would be very, very proud of the way that Izuku carries himself and how he pretty much uses his abilities to his best ability in each and every Quirk apprehension test. Now, eventually, what would end up happening is that, you know, Aizawa this time around would end up pretty much like being like, all right, nobody's getting expelled. Because even though Mineta doesn't have that much potential, it's kind of there. I mean, he was able to beat Izuku, who actually had an OP quirk, even though, you know, he did break his finger. But, I mean, it's like Mineta stayed in the original, so I don't really want to kick him out because he's just kind of there for comedic purposes. And I think that him and Izuku would kind of make kind of good friends. I'm not going to lie. Just because like Izuku likes women, Mineta likes women. Let's just let those two like them together, right? But basically what ends up happening is Izuku and Mineta like don't hit it off yet, and they don't even really talk to each other, but they do kind of understand their own existence, right? And what ends up happening after this is pretty much that everybody goes home, right? Deku ends up getting picked up by his mom, and Bakugo does so as well. And eventually what ends up pretty much happening following this is a couple of days worth of them all just getting to know each other and kind of understanding their own personal classroom dynamics, such as them being able to kind of, how do I put this? Them being able to kind of like get to know each other and get to know what their likes are, dislikes are, and friend groups individually. Like when you go to a new school and you're kind of trying to get to know who your friends are and like what group you're going to associate with, those are pretty much what the first couple of days are filled with. Eventually though, on the fourth day, what would end up happening is All Might busts in through the classroom and is all like, I am here. And from here, the class just goes absolutely bazonkers, right? Like everybody's like, oh my God, it's All Might, right? And afterwards, you know, he begins to have a cocky smile on his face. Izuku's even a little bit intrigued by him. He's very respectful of All Might. Like he does view him in a very good limelight, right? And All Might is, you know, he's doing his thing. And eventually he ends up pretty much showing the classroom their costumes, which all of them would end up loving, obviously. And once they all look at their costumes and get changed, All Might would pretty much begin to tell the classroom about the heroes versus villains event, and they would all pretty much begin to get ready to do so. Now, when it comes to the heroes versus villain event, I really don't see too much crazy stuff happening here, so I'm just going to be saying that Izuku's still going to... Actually, no, I'm going to put Izuku with Bakugo, just because I don't want to do Bakugo dirty this time around, because he's not the same guy he is in the original. He kind of has a different attitude. He's more like a Kainu, where he like knows he's better, but like he knows he's not better than everyone, right? Like he knows that there's people higher up than him, but he's not going to let anybody lower than him talk down to him, right? Kind of like that, but he's not going to be mean. He's going to be more mellowed out just because Izuku was there to be like, dude, leave those kids alone, right? And that's kind of just how Bakugo's personality would have changed this time around. But because I want him to fight Todoroki early on, I'm going to have him actually fight Todoroki, and that's going to be pretty interesting to watch. Ice versus Ice. And who does Todoroki get paired with? I'm pretty sure that Todoroki in the original gets paired with Invisible Girl, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe Momo. But regardless of who he gets paired with, that team's gonna lose. It's not even a question. It's amazing the way that it happens. Like, I'm not even gonna sugarcoat this. Izuku, the second that the battle begins, would be like, Bakugo, I'm gonna tell you this right now. You're gonna get 1 minute of having fun and trying to fight them before I freeze the whole place. And Bakugo would look at him and say, dude, just freeze the place. I'm not trying to be in there when it's all covered in ice. And Izuku's like, all right. So he stomps his foot, and the entire building, including the bomb, Todoroki, and his teammate, would all be frozen solid. Izuku then creates some icy stairs and walks up them, making his way directly to the bomb room. And what ends up happening here is he just walks to the bomb and he's like, all right, now I guess I got to, as he like begins like getting closer to it and beginning to try to touch it, and Todoroki inside of the ice would begin using as fire to begin melting the ice on himself. And right as he's finished melting the ice on himself, Izuku looks at Todoroki and he's like, yo, you think you could melt this thing? I'm having a hard time grabbing him. But Todoroki shoots an ice pillar at him, and Izuku dodges out of the way, appearing in front of Todoroki as he's like, that wasn't very nice. He then says, he then freezes him in a thicker layer of ice, because the layer that he had around himself was very thin, just because he didn't want to like hurt Todoroki. But he completely freezes Todoroki in a cube and cage of ice that Todoroki is just stuck in, as like his whole facial expression is just like, what? And Deku just freezes him as he walks over towards the bomb and begins chipping away at it, as All Might just screams, "Hero Team wins!" All right, jumping into part 2, we're going to be picking off right where the story last left off. Now, obviously, Deku and Bakugo ended up winning that portion of the heroes versus villains event, and what would end up happening after this is All Might essentially walking up to Midoriya and pretty much tapping him on the shoulder, asking him if he could actually speak with him privately. Now, what would go on to happen here is All Might goes on to pretty much take Izuku to another room, and inside of there, he would end up asking Izuku just one question. It's not going to be, would you want one for all or anything like that, but it's pretty much just going to be asking him if he was the one responsible for freezing a sludge villain a couple months ago, maybe 10 months ago in a couple weeks. And Izuku's like, oh, right, the green guy, right? And All Might's like, yeah, that was you? Izuku's like, yeah, the dude tried to like cover my body and like take me over or something like that. I froze him and I had to go away because, you know, I had to go with my mom. All Might is like, oh, well, that was really all I wanted to know, kid. How long have you been this powerful? Izuku's like, I don't really know. I kind of had a great grasp over my powers from the moment that I ended up realizing I unlocked them. I was about 4 years old. I probably ended up mastering them at the age of 7 and just ended up making some new cool techniques by the age of 10. After that, I just ended up kind of relaxing and just working on my ice powers and speed and physical strength. Just going to the gym every day and working with weighted clothing and stuff like that. You know, basic things. You'd know all about that, right, All Might? And All Might's like, yeah, sure, kid, I guess. Izuku's like, yeah, I spent most of my middle school years inside of you know, martial arts classes and trying to incorporate that into my fighting style, and ended up realizing that that just made me too powerful to even have fun fighting anybody anymore. I think the only person who could generally give me a challenge now would be somebody like you or Endeavor. Endeavor because of his flames, and you because you're just so fast, I don't know if I could freeze you. And All Might is like, oh, well, I appreciate the compliment, young man. From here, he would be like, maybe someday when you are a pro hero, you can face us both at full power. And Izuku would say, sure thing, All Might. As, he ends up walking out. And before walking out, he's like, hold on, one last question. I've noticed that your hero productivity levels have dropped down significantly over the past couple of years. You mind telling me why that is? All Might has a beam of sweat come down his face, and Izuku is like, you can tell me another day, All Might. I'm not gonna pry if it's something you don't want to tell. As he closes the door and he ends up going over towards the direction of his house. Now he makes it there and pretty much just ends up chilling for the entire day. Nothing really interesting does happen there, except for on his way home, Izuku ends up kind of seeing a little villain attack and just watching a hero pretty much take care of it. And he's just like, oh, interesting, that's pretty cool. But pretty much after that, he just has dinner and passes out. About a week goes by and eventually they all get permission slips to be pretty much going to the USJ. And during that entire time, Todoroki already developed a huge unliking, a huge disdain of Midoriya. Now, this dislike literally just came from the fact that Izuku beat him and he made him look bad. So Todoroki at this current moment is pretty much just looking forward to the UA Sports Festival so he can establish his dominance. But anybody who realistically has to establish their dominance is not usually a dominant person. You don't say you're going to establish it, you just do with your physical presence. But with Todoroki doing this, he's kind of making himself look like a fool. Anyways, though, what ends up happening here is that we pretty much end up having the entire classroom being in the cafeteria, right? And this is when the Ida big moment would happen, where everybody just picks Ida to be the class president because of his willingness to act in face of danger and calm everybody down. So he is made the classroom president, and eventually we would pretty much just have a mini time skip until all of the students are just on the bus, just vibing. Everybody's kind of just chilling and being like, all right, so what's your quirk? Who do you guys think is the strongest? And Tsuyu just blatantly says it. She's like, oh, it's Midoriya. It's Midoriya by a long shot. The next one would probably be Bakugo, but we really don't know how strong he is. And then Todoroki, I don't know, I just really don't like Tsuyu. I'm sorry, that's why I was doing her voice like that, but I just have a strong dislike for her. But anyways, so what ends up happening here is that Izuku is pretty much just sitting next to Uraraka at this moment, right? And Izuku is just there, he looks towards Bakugo, he has a smirk on his face, and he's risen Uraraka up, she's blushing all over the place, and Izuku just continues spitting game, right? Kaminari and Mineta are just watching from afar, and they're like, so lucky. And Izuku just continues spitting his game to Uraraka until eventually they hop out of the bus. And 13 gives her lame speech. Immediately after this, a villain would show up in the middle of the USJ, and this is going to be Kurogiri, just like always. And what happens here is actually going to be very, very interesting, because it's yes, Deku could potentially freeze everything, but that would also freeze his teammates and classmates. And since the door is locked, he can't exactly just get them out anymore. So what options does he really have? Well, here's one. He immediately looks to Aizawa and asks him if that's a fake villain, and the second that Aizawa nods his head no and gets into serious mode, Izuku knows that now is literally the only time to act. So Izuku pretty much uses his ice lances, and he shoots a ton of ice at him. He just shoots it at Kurogiri, and Kurogiri is forced to pretty much dodge mid-air and make it so that he doesn't get hit in his vital spot that he only can take damage in. Once Izuku realizes this, he's able to quickly identify the fact that Kurogiri can take damage just in a very specific spot. And that's something that's very, very intriguing to Izuku. So right as he was about to pretty much do this, Kurogiri was able to actually get the upper hand on him and teleport him straight to the boat area, just like in any other story. And what ends up happening here is Izuku would pretty much begin falling onto the water, but as soon as he sees it, he immediately transforms everything around him into ice. And all of the villains that were inside of the water just all get frozen. Now, immediately as he does this, he realizes that Mineta and Tsuyu just barely made it out of the water, and he's like, oh wow, I could have frozen them too, not realizing that they were there with him. He pretty much feels pretty bad about it, but he's like, I'm not gonna say anything. And after this, they walk towards the mainland, only to see Aizawa pretty much having a hard time against some villains. Once Izuku sees this, he immediately realizes that now is the best time to pretty much act. And so he creates a couple of ice clones that go in and do take care of, all of Izuku's dirty work. And as this happens, Shigaraki's scratching his neck and he's like, oh, sorry guys. Okay. Let's pretend, let's go back in time. All right, we're there. And Shigaraki looks at Izuku, right? And then he just like scratches his neck and he's like, Kurogiri, Nomu, now. And the Nomu gets teleported into the battlefield, leading to Shigaraki screaming, Nomu, kill the brat. And following this altercation, the Nomu immediately blitzes at Deku and just punches a hole straight into the chest of Izuku. Now, Izuku like falls back and like ice just like stays there onto the ground. And Shigaraki just starts laughing. He's like, yeah, I killed him, right? And Izuku just kind of like is sitting there like pretending to die as Shigaraki is just looking at the direction of the Nomu, and Izuku just goes over by the Nomu. As the Nomu like walks back towards towards Shigaraki, Izuku freezes the thing. And he does not just freeze like the outside. He freezes the inside of the Nomu. Like the Nomu's blood and like everything that it has inside is completely and utterly frozen. Because Izuku could just tell that thing is not alive. And even if it is, it's definitely experiencing a misery of just feeling horrible pain and stuff. So Izuku immediately realizes that, he kind of just has to get rid of it and put the thing out of its misery. So he does so, and then he walks towards Shigaraki's direction, only to pretty much be stopped by Kurogiri, who is pretty much the last line of defense for Shigaraki. But as soon as Izuku sees this, he realizes that he needs to take care of this guy first. So he throws up some leaves into the air, blows cold air, making a saber, and he creates the ice saber, right? And once he does this, he looks at Kurogiri and he blitzes as fast as he can, only to pretty much hit Kurogiri with the ice sword, and Kurogiri's little metal part would just get frozen entirely, leading to Izuku looking at Shigaraki, who immediately is like, no, this can't be happening. But he knows he can't fight him close quarters. So Shigaraki begins to try to run away from Izuku, and Izuku just begins to pretty much like walk at Shigaraki. Now Shigaraki makes it towards one of the exits of the USJ that is like all the way in the back where a lot of villains are at, and he begins pushing them out of the way, like, get out of my way. And Izuku's following, freezing up all the villains along the way, and eventually he freezes the door, leading Shigaraki to have to rush at Izuku and try his last thing to actually damage him, which is to just decay Izuku. And Izuku, knowing that he's never been hurt before, is like, whatever, right? And Shigaraki grabs a hold of Izuku's ice arm, and when Izuku feels it, he's like, I don't feel, until he kind of feels a little bit of damage, and it's like, bro, what? Like his ice decayed kind of, but it's not really what happened. What really happens is that Izuku's ice just pretty much proceeds to turn into water, and that water just hits the ground. And Izuku's kind of shocked because he's taken like physical damage, but nobody's ever just melted him like that before. And it did feel strange, so Izuku doesn't want to feel that again. So Izuku cuts his entire arm off and just regrows it with ice. And following this, he pretty much looks at Shigaraki and he's like, whew, as he blows Shigaraki and just turns him into complete ice, right? Shigaraki is sitting there like a ice statue. And Izuku is just like, all right, that's one villain taken care of. Now to go take care of the rest. And following this, Izuku just goes on to pretty much body everybody who is inside of the USJ, going on to essentially eliminate them as easy as he possibly could. Like, the process is so easy for Izuku that it's just like, bruh, like, it like generally does not get any easier than this, right? And that's just what's really happening right now. But what ends up happening here after this is we basically get a situation where what ends up happening is that okay. I'm confusing myself. Let's backtrack. Izuku just took care of the villains. Everybody's currently getting taken off by the police officers, and Izuku was just sitting back there like, all right, so what do I do? And everybody's just kind of talking about how awesome Izuku was, right? Like, Izuku was the MVP 100%. Nobody else could stand up to him, and it was just incredible. And even when All Might ends up actually arriving, he just kind of tells Izuku that he's very proud of him. And he just thinks about what could have been if he would have given him One for All. Like, if Izuku had One for All for One would be done for. Like, dunzos. There's nothing All for One could do at that point. But since he hasn't done that quite yet, they still have a bit of a chance for All for One to win. But since Shigaraki and Kurogiri are both going to be in Tartarus, All for One is either A, going to have to launch a full-scale attack on Tartarus to break them out, or B, have to find a brand new successor, which is exactly what I'm going to be leaning towards. I'm going to be saying that he's going to just kind of like say, okay, Shigaraki was clearly failed, he didn't go through with the mission properly, but Kurogiri is a tough loss. But since he can't exactly do that quite yet, he ends up finding somebody else to pretty much mentor, somebody else to align himself with. And while that's happening, all the other students pretty much get a 1 week break off of school to train, but in Izuku's case, just binge YouTube videos. And Izuku would click on one of his favorite videos. He pretty much just clicks on the video that is like Andrew Tate versus Jake Paul face off, right? And he sees that and he's like, oh, that's interesting. But before the video even plays, what ends up happening is he gets hit with an ad and he's like, bro, what's this? But it's just this guy talking about fandom. And he's like, what's fandom? Well, let me tell you. As anime fans, we love to show our support to our favorite shows by rocking anime apparel. But something I'm pretty sure we can all agree on is it's so expensive. So I've partnered up with Fandom to bring you all affordable, high quality anime merch that you are sure to love. And if you use my code Xehther at checkout, you can even get an extra 10% off the already affordable merch. Keep in mind, it does come from overseas sellers, so its sizing is going to be different since it's overseas. That said, let's get back into the video. What do you guys think about that ad transition? Do you guys like it? You guys hate it? What do you think? Nah, but seriously though, jumping back into the story, we cut into the 1 week break currently being over and everybody just being inside of the UA Sports Festival, pretty much getting ready to take place in anything that was really about to happen. Izuku's just doing his best to, you know, like just really kind of stay low key, and everybody else is doing their own thing, just trying to like look intimidating and stuff like that. But Izuku doesn't really care about any of those small factors that come into play. So when it comes to that race, what ends up pretty much happening is that once Todoroki like slams his foot down, right? Like he slams his foot down and turns everything to ice, Izuku is able to like just ignore it. Like ice does not bother him. Izuku is literally ice. So even if Todoroki was to shoot an ice attack at him, Izuku's not gonna feel it, bro. Like he could just merge with the ice, or like, you know what I mean? Like he can't hurt him. He is ice. You can't hurt him. I don't care. Like maybe fire could hurt him, but it's like I don't really think so, because you have to be kind of like of the property to hurt him. I think fire could definitely do a little bit of damage though. So like somebody like Endeavor could probably give Izuku a run for his money, since, you know, obviously Aokiji was fighting Akainu, who, you know, obviously had magma, which is a lot hotter than fire. So I don't know, like maybe not. Maybe Dabi would be like somebody good for Izuku to fight off against, but Dabi doesn't even have the fire control at this point to even face him. So I'm not sure like who would realistically give him battle. Guys, comment down below and let me know what you guys think. Who do you guys think realistically could actually give Deku a real one-on-one like trouble when it comes to a fight? I'm not really sure right now, but I think a fire user maybe. That said, let's get back into the what if. Okay, so Izuku, obviously he does take care of the race, and when it comes to the speech, I know I completely skipped over it, but it's just because I don't really feel like giving a speech right now, and I don't really think that Izuku would really say too much in terms of speech, just because of the person he is and his nonchalant nature. So once he ends up winning the ice race portion, he pretty much just has a little bit of a nonchalant attitude, like just this cool vibe off of him that everybody picks up on, right? And even though he has a huge target on his back, he doesn't care, like not even a little bit. He goes over towards Bakugo and asks him if he's wanting to team up. And Bakugo's like, sure, why not? And, you know, he then walks over towards somebody else, but that's when Mei Hatsume jumps in the way and she's like, hey, can I be on your team? And Izuku's like, sure. And after this, Araka's like, yeah, can I be on your team? And Izuku's like, I was just about to ask you. And, you know, she smirks and, you know, she looks at Mei and she gets a little bit intimidated because it's like another girl's on the team, but it's like, whatever. But regardless of that, what ends up pretty much happening here is that we get a little bit of a scene where, you know, they're all like on top and Izuku's gonna be like the rider, like the guy who's on top of everything. running. And when this is all happening, we basically end up getting a bit of a strange scene where Izuku essentially just tells the team to chill out as he creates an ice dome around his entire team. Now this ice dome would be fairly thick. So it's like this small ice dome that they could still see out of, but like nobody could get to them, if that makes sense. Like nobody could physically get close to them. So they're kind of in a very safe situation as of this moment, and they just pretty much end up passing the cavalry battle because of that. Todoroki decides to fight Izuku in the 1v1 battles instead to show his dominance over him, and so he decides to pretty much go after just headbands. And since Bakugo isn't out in the running, there's really nobody for Izuku to fear when it comes to his defenses. But regardless of that, that ends up pretty much finishing with Izuku keeping the 100 million points and winning, and everybody getting their 1v1 battles just like in the original, which does cue Shinso versus Deku. Now, normally in most of my what ifs where Deku doesn't have one for all or some sort of great mind control and, is in touch with his mind, I usually have it so that Izuku just loses, because like realistically, a lot of people would lose to Shinso without knowing his abilities. But Izuku is just so nonchalant, bro. Like, he doesn't care. The second that midnight goes, go! Izuku just looks at Shinso, and because he said some pretty rude things, Izuku pretty much slams his foot on the entire arena and freezes Shinso in a cube of ice, right? Now, Shinso, once frozen, is just completely taken out, and everybody begins cheering for Izuku because it's the dude is a badass. But after that battle, we eventually cue Deku versus Todoroki. Now, this battle is actually going to be kind of interesting, because the beginning of the battle would go something like this. Now, Todoroki immediately begins to use a gigantic iceberg, and it's cool and all, but it's it doesn't do what it was intended to do, right? Because it's Izuku was there and he just did not care, bro. Izuku saw this ice coming at him and he just could not have cared less. Ice is ice. So what does Izuku do? I know we've never seen Aokiji show the ability of being able to merge in with ice, so I'm not going to be saying he does that, but pretty much what he does end up doing is creating an ice saber and chopping his way through the ice, making Todoroki be like, what? He survived? And Izuku just kind of being right in front of Todoroki, and him trying to use ice attacks against Izuku, but Izuku would shoot ice attacks right back, and it would be almost as if they're kind of mirroring each other, except Izuku's a lot stronger, so it's not a mirror. It's kind of just looking at a better version of yourself. And eventually Todoroki's I'm sick of this, and he's about to quit, but then Endeavor just goes Shoto, and a fire is lit under Todoroki. No pun intended, but he eventually is whatever, and he shoots his fire out at Izuku, and he's if I can't beat you with my ice, I'll beat you with my fire. And he shoots a beam of fire straight at Izuku, which kind of does begin to melt the ice, and this is when they kind of begin to kind of look a little even, but Izuku's ice is just so much colder than Todoroki's fire that he's eventually covered in it, and Todoroki ends up taking the L to Izuku. And everybody's going crazy in the stands. They're what? No way! And then the final battle is announced, which is essentially just going to be Bakugo versus Izuku Midoriya. But the second that they step into the stage, Izuku looks at everybody and he just walks around and he looks at Izuku. And Midnight goes, go! And Bakugo lifts his hand up and Izuku's all right, what's he gonna do? But he's just I give up. And everybody's what? And Bakugo is just I give up. And it's just everybody's just so shocked. They're ain't no way, bro. We paid all this just for this dude to give up. And Izuku just sits there and there's just this awkward moment of silence before All Might is just well, I guess Izuku Midoriya is the winner. Okay, so jumping back into the story, we pretty much cut back to the entire class right in UA, right? Everybody's just bickering, they're talking to each other, and they're all pretty much just excited about the previous events of the UA Sports Festival. People are congratulating Deku on his achievement of being the winner, and Bakugo would tell him that, there was really no other option for him. He was not going to win, that they fought about 1,000,000 times, and every time that they fought, it doesn't matter what Bakugo does, Deku always won. So it was you know what, dude? I just accepted it. You're stronger than me, and it's okay. It's fine by me. Just as long as villains aren't stronger than me, I'm cool with that. And so Bakugo pretty much just fist bumps Deku, and so Aizawa walks in the classroom and is like, all right, students, today we have a special guest. And in comes Midnight, right? The second that Midnight enters the room, Izuku looks at her and he's like, damn, I've missed her. And like he looks right at her and she's like, all right, class, so today you guys are gonna pick your hero names, right? Now, as soon as this happens, Izuku kind of just like is like looking at her in a certain type of way the entire time that they're there. Like Izuku is like, he's giving her that Riz stare, you know what I'm saying? And my boy Izuku's like letting it be known that like he likes what he sees. And so, when he finally goes up there and she's like, all right, so what's your hero name? He goes, I thought about it for a bit and I decided that I would want to pick the hero name Frozone. It just sounds pretty cool. She would immediately say, that's an awesome name. And then he'd be like, yeah, Midnight's a pretty cool name as well. How'd you think about it? She just begins to tell the story about it. And, he just looks at her as if he's all interested. And she's like, oh, well, thanks. And from here, Izuku just walks back to the classroom and Bakugo's like, dude, no way you're hitting on Midnight right now. Izuku's like, what, dude? You only live once, right? And Bakugo's like, I guess. As he goes up there and he's like, Lord Explosion Murder. But Midnight is like, no. And then he has to change his name to Dynamite. You know what I'm saying? It's a pretty cool hero name, but like still not as cool as Lord Explosion Murder. But regardless of that, what ends up happening after the class is basically Izuku like pretty much stays until everything would be all said and done. And Midnight and Aizawa would be the only ones there, except Aizawa's pretty much passed out. And Izuku looks at Midnight and he's like, hey, I really enjoyed having you in the class today. And Midnight walks up to Izuku and she's all like, look, all I'm gonna say is that like you're cute for your age, but you're a bit too young for me. And Izuku looks at her and he's like, so if I grow up a little bit, then this could be a possibility. And a little bit of ice comes off of his breath and she's like, I'm not saying no, but I'm also not saying yes. And she walks out the class and Izuku's like, I'm finna bag me on MILF. But after this, Izuku basically walks out of the classroom and the dude pretty much just goes on to go to his internship. Now, who does Izuku go after in terms of the internship? Let's just say that he goes with Endeavor, because Endeavor ended up actually sending him a request. And since Todoroki's not going to accept because he didn't have his talk with Izuku and, make him kind of want to forgive his father, Izuku's pretty much the one that's there with Endeavor. Now, the entire agency process that Izuku would spend time with Endeavor, Izuku would pretty much be showing Endeavor that he has the control over his quirk of a pro hero, not to mention the speed to keep up with Endeavor himself. And Endeavor would be extremely shocked that a kid is even at UA having this level of finesse, that if he was out on the streets, he could probably save hundreds of thousands of lives. He would question why the Hero Society has to have some people be older than a certain age to become heroes, but nonetheless, he would decide that it is what it is, and eventually, he ends up pretty much just continuing to talk to Izuku and tell him what to do stuff. He says it in a very rude, condescending way every time, but Izuku doesn't mind so long as he gets to get the information down that he likes. And towards the end of it, Izuku would look at Endeavor and ask him if he would be willing to have a little bit of a sparring session with him. Endeavor looks down at him and he's like, kid, you know what you're asking me, right? You're asking to fight the number 2 hero. You either got a lot of guts or you're downright crazy. And Izuku looks at him and goes, well, I guess I'm downright crazy. So, you accept or are you scared? Endeavor scoffs and he's like, come with me, kid. Water break! ASMR. Oh yeah. Anyways, so after that, what basically ends up happening is Izuku goes to like this empty training room area that Endeavor. Okay, I'm gonna throw this water bottle out of here. Endeavor ends up taking Izuku towards this training area where like there's really nothing there, and Izuku looks towards Endeavor as Endeavor says, look kid, you can throw any attack you want at me, it's not gonna do a thing. And Izuku just goes, fine. As using his ice powers, he creates an ice sculpture of a phoenix and it just flies. It just flies straight at Endeavor, right? And Endeavor is like shocked, like he shoots his hell flames at it, right? And the phoenix, it obviously does melt, but by the time that it's melted, Endeavor, okay. I'm sorry, I need to stop talking as slow as I am. All right, so let me just picture the scene in my head real quick so I can give you guys a better battle. Okay, so basically what ends up happening here is that essentially Izuku shoots like a fire phoenix at him, right? And Endeavor melts it, but because he's melting it, he has like his vision in front of him kind of like messed up, so like he can't see in front of him. And Izuku eventually proceeds to blitz over towards Endeavor and have it to where, you know, him and Endeavor are like basically going at it, right? Like he ends up like getting in front of Endeavor by the time that he finishes making the Phoenix, and Izuku rushes in at Endeavor and he tries to land a hit with his sword. He's using his ice saber, right? And Endeavor would end up having to actually dodge out of the way and then shooting a huge ball of flames at Izuku. Now, the ball of flames would actually end up hitting him, and it would create an opening inside of his like face and his chest and stuff like that. And Endeavor would rush to him saying, "Kid, are you all right?" But the thing would basically turn into like water on the ground, and Endeavor turns back only to see Izuku there, who would literally just land a mean punch to the face of Endeavor. And after he does this, he ends up pretty much getting sent flying to the floor, leading Izuku to say, "I Sage," as he slams his foot onto the ground and everything in the room begins to pretty much get like covered in ice. And Endeavor would be surrounded in it as well, but his flames would be picking up and picking up and picking up, and they eventually turn blue, and it like melts everything, like everything around him in his vicinity begins melting because it's just that hot, right? And he walks towards the direction of Izuku and he's like, "You got some guts, kid, but let's see you keep up with this," as he shoots blue flames at the direction of Izuku, and Izuku shoots a strong like layer of thick ice straight at Endeavor, and it's just like clashing. It's like ice and fire just like colliding with each other until eventually so much smoke fills up the area, and Izuku looks at Endeavor and he's like, "Good job, buddy, but not good enough," as you know, he steps on it and like more ice begins coming to the point where Endeavor's fire can't melt it at the rapid pace that Izuku's shooting his ice at. And because Endeavor has a time limit and Izuku doesn't, he's able to eventually get overwhelmed, leading Endeavor to have to accept that he lost. And well, that's pretty much it. Like, he just lost. That's it. GG's. Izuku was actually the winner, and on this day, he ends up finding out that he's actually stronger than the pro hero Endeavor. Now, the only person that he has to face off against is somebody like All Might, and after that, he pretty much completed his dream of becoming the strongest. But after this, we basically just have all the internships end, and when they return to school, they end up just having the little race event to see how much they've progressed. Now, Izuku would just use his general speed to find All Might and his know-how and knowledge to essentially go get All Might and be the winner of that event, leading to the final exams happening and the study sessions being just like they would in the original, with Izuku obviously having to face off against All Might finally, which is actually going to be pretty cool because, you know, he just fought Endeavor and now he's about to fight All Might. And the way that I see this all pretty much playing out is the battle beginning with All Might like all the way towards like the exit, and Izuku just rushing straight at him, guns blazing, right? Bakugo's on his team, and Bakugo comes flying in with an explosion, only to be grabbed by All Might and slammed on the ground. But as that happens, Izuku shoots ice lances at the direction of All Might, which he would have to dodge out of the way and let Bakugo go. Bakugo would charge up a mean explosion and send it flying at the direction of All Might, as All Might pretty much is sent flying back, and Izuku would be there ready to unleash a strong attack, creating an ice saber and pretty much going to slash at All Might. But All Might would use his punches to redirect his trajectory up into the air and throw a bunch of air punches at the direction of Izuku. Now, Izuku would have to jump out of the way, and immediately after this, he would create an ice dragon that would shoot at the direction of All Might, leading All Might to actually get grasped by the dragon. Like, the dragon would clench its jaw onto All Might, and All Might would have a tough time trying to break free as he would crash into a building, and Izuku would look at Bakugo and say, "Bakugo, do it," as Bakugo flies at All Might using a howitzer impact right at the building, which All Might would get hit with and would be sent flying even further back. And after this, Izuku would say, just to put the final nail in the coffin, "I Sage," as, you know, he freezes the entire thing, and Bakugo stops sweating because of how cold it is, right? And, you know, in the smoke, All Might comes bursting out and just socks Bakugo in the stomach, right? And Bakugo's just like, right? And he like falls onto the ground and he's just completely knocked out. And Izuku's the only one left there as All Might comes blitzing in at Deku. And Deku would rush in being like, "Fine then, hand to hand it is," as he comes in and All Might throws a punch at him, but Izuku like rolls off the punch, grabs his arm, and like slams him onto the ground, leaving All Might to collapse with the ground and like cause a thud. As he ricochets back up and he tries to kick at Deku, but Deku jumps over it and he grabs a hold of All Might, saying ice capsule. As All Might pretty much just gets turned into a literal just statue of himself. As Izuku looks at him and he's like, he'll probably break out if I don't. And it begins to crack like it cracks a tiny bit. And then Izuku's like, I need more. As like he freezes it and the ice just becomes thicker and thicker and thicker and thicker and thicker until it becomes ice so thick that it's the size of a literal like a building, right? And eventually the thing would begin cracking a little bit, but All Might, like, he would just get frozen and that would just be it. It would be just GG, right? And after this, Izuku would actually go on to his classmates and say, I defeated All Might. It's great. He's nonchalant about it or whatever. And Midnight would have actually been watching this. And Izuku just like winks at her and she has a straight face, but on the inside, she's like, can't believe that I'm going to be with somebody even more powerful than All Might, right? And, Izuku at this current moment is 16 years old, bro. So the dude only has to wait 2 more years. That's really what we're getting to in terms of the story. Like this all has not been about becoming a hero. His secret intentions was always getting with Midnight. This is the real plot of the story. I'm just playing. No, but seriously though, guys, what ends up happening after this is we basically cut into the provisional licensing exam. Well, not necessarily after this, but after the forest training arc. And the reason that I say provisional hero training license before that is just because of the simple fact that if you guys remember back to part 1 or 2, I'm not really quite sure, Izuku ended up pretty much taking care of Shigaraki as well as Kurogiri, leading the League of Villains to essentially end up being disbanded and all of the men that was in the League of Villains being placed under new organization, under a new leader that all for one deems to be more worthy than Shigaraki, far more calculated, smart, and dangerous than anything Shigaraki could have ever been. This is obviously going to be Overhaul, and because he has no real care about Bakugo or anything like that, I don't see anything similar to what the Vanguard Action Squad did happening. So the Forest Training Arc Camp is literally just a bit of a filler like episode. And what pretty much ends up happening is that they get to just enjoy their time, train with their quirks, and pretty much be with their classmates and have a great time, getting to work on their powers and their flaws and stuff like that. And eventually we cut into the provisional hero licensing exam, which essentially goes basically just like it would in canon, except when it comes to everybody who attacks UA, we would just get this cold scene of Deku pretty much freezing everything and like all the balls that are coming at their direction just being frozen mid-air, like falling onto the ground and just breaking, right? And Izuku just like looking at all of the ice statues and like just being like, looks like these guys are already out, tapping them. And as the entirety of UA, who really doesn't care about getting their own points, would just go over, tap it, and go on to the next event, right? As that would be that. And Izuku would eventually pretty much get his hero license exam. And what happens immediately following this is the introduction of a character who was very, very popular in the fandom, obviously, Mirio. And this time around, mind you guys, Mirio does have one for all because, Deku doesn't get it, Bakugo doesn't get it, so it's only right for Mirio to get it, right? And so Mirio is going to be having one for all, and it's going to be pretty cool, but like nothing too crazy, right? But essentially what ends up happening is that Mirio goes to the classroom, right? And he is just as enthusiastic as ever, but when he sees Izuku, something inside of him just wants to fight him because it's like the dude was able to defeat his master and he wants to know if he could have that same luck if he was to fight against like All Might. They've never like sparred full power before, but he thinks that he's already surpassed them. So he thinks that he has a definite strong chance of defeating this guy and maybe just showing him that there still is more that he could work towards, showing him that, there's always room for improvement, something that Mirio already learned early on and that he lives by. So even when he advances in one for all's percentages, he continues to try to go higher and higher. Even if he was to hit 100%, I feel like Mirio would be the kind of person to try to go even further beyond. So we get into the battle between Class 1A versus Mirio, and this time around Mirio actually asks his classmates to actually get involved, such as Nejire and Sun Eater, and they would do so, making the attack on the classroom a lot easier, and Mirio would pretty much just focus on Izuku. And a couple of the weaker classmates, he takes them out screaming power, right, as he's using One For All to do this, and he does damage them a bit more than usual, but they'll be fine. And Nejire ends up taking care of some of the girls, with Tamaki taking care of like Kirishima and stuff like that, right? And you know, Nejire and Tamaki actually taking care of Bakugo himself. It would be a very hot fought battle, but it would still end up with Bakugo being on the losing side, and eventually Izuku being the only one left. Nejire comes in trying to use her abilities as Mirio says, Nejire, that's mine. And she backs up, and Mirio, like, he kind of cracks his knuckles and says, I heard you beat All Might. Let's see if you can beat a third-year student, right? Izuku smirks, and Mirio comes in blitzing at him with blinding speeds as, you know, a punch comes flying in, and Izuku would get punched straight in the face, not being fast enough to dodge it, as his entire, like, head would pretty much break off. And immediately after this, Mirio would be like, what? I didn't mean. And, you know, Izuku reforms his head, and, you know, he simply grabs onto Mirio as he says, you're done for, kid. Ice Age. But before he could do that, Mirio phases through the ground, making it so that he couldn't get frozen, and pops right back up on top of the ice, making him slowly start slipping. But with his quirk of danger sense and float, he would be able to keep himself mid-air long enough for him not to actually be having to touch the ice. And Izuku lunges at him, trying to defeat him very, very quickly, but Mirio, using One For All's high percentages of 60%, would be able to pretty much go by Izuku with blinding speeds, showing him that there is still more that he can pretty much improve on, and leading Izuku to be like, all right, so I'm pretty strong, but this dude is just fast and like powerful, like he's faster and stronger than me. What do I do, right? And so he begins to pretty much think of some strategies, such as creating the you know, his animal sculptures to go at him, and using clones to essentially catch Mirio off guard. But in the end, Mirio would pretty much get the upper hand, just due to the fact that he kind of has the perfect counter to Izuku. Not only does he have speed and strength, but he also has the ability to blatantly just dodge all of Izuku's attacks. He can just phase, and it's very hard for Izuku to deal with. And this is just showing him that he needs to get even more powerful. So this is not even a bad thing for Izuku. I mean, he is going to get way stronger because of this interaction, and his desire for training is going to skyrocket, leading him to pretty much get more and more powerful, and leading him to get to the same power levels that Aokiji would get to by the time that he's like 18, right? Or like 20-ish, right? But regardless of that, Mirio would offer Izuku a chance to intern with his agency, Tsunade. And Izuku is like, bro, like, say less, Brody. Like, I'll definitely totes accept, right? And he just like goes over to the, you know, the agency. And pretty much what ends up happening this time around is that once they go on their hero patrol and they're basically walking around, this would be so anticlimactic. You guys are gonna get so mad at me. But basically what ends up happening is that Izuku and Mirio encounter Overhaul right in the alleyway, and you know, Eri comes flying in, and you know, she basically is like holding on to Izuku, and Izuku's like, is this girl okay? Or he sees the bandages and just gets pissed. So like he holds her, and then like with one foot he like taps the ground, freezing everything, leading to Overhaul being frozen himself. But with his Overhaul quirk, he destroys the ice, and you know, Izuku just looks as this dude really just did that. And so Izuku's like, fine then, I guess I'll take care of this in a better way, as he ends up pretty much shooting ice lances at the direction of Overhaul, which he has to dodge, leading Overhaul to shoot spikes at him. But before the spikes could even be shot, Mirio would come in with a with a death-like uppercut that would send Overhaul flying back, and Overhaul would crash into the ground as Mirio would fall right back down and just bam, 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 just begin pummeling this dude like hard as hell. And Overhaul pretty much gets like completely knocked out. Like the dude is dunzos. Izuku would take the extra precaution and freeze him, and afterwards we would just get Overhaul being thrown into the authorities, with All For One being like, every time this kid always captures my successors, right? And so Overhaul, All For One goes into hiding, knowing that, you know, like he kind of he kind of can't beat this kid. So for a couple of years, he goes into hiding, and eventually once Izuku does end up becoming the #2 hero of the world, we basically end up having him fight against All For One in an all-out battle, which All For One actually ends up getting no diffed on an off-screen battle, which would just be like the best part. Like, could you guys imagine the big bad of a series just gets off-screen? Like, how mad would you guys be? Well, we're gonna find out with this one. But yeah, All For One pretty much gets no diffed, and because of the fact that he increases speed and just trains so incredibly hard, Izuku was eventually, because of just his personality, able to pretty much get over Mirio in terms of like his hero like saves and stuff like that. But he never became first, just because of the fact that Mirio just has that like #1 hero personality, and Izuku's just so nonchalant and chill that he would always remain at second place, except he would definitely be stronger than Mirio, because regardless of what power dude has, Izuku has Aokiji's devil fruit, and that would be more than enough for Izuku to be able to keep up with the best of the best. Not to mention that after a couple of years, due to the fact that he has powers from another dimension, I think it's definitely fair to give Izuku the abilities of Haki, like observation and armament and stuff like that, and even conquerors. And even though I didn't include those main things in the series, it was only due to the fact that I didn't think he would really need it, and I thought that I should mostly focus on the Hie no Mi aspect of the story. That said though, ladies and gentlemen, if you guys enjoyed today's story, definitely make sure to slap up that like button and comment down below. Let me know what you guys thought about today's story, but with that all out of the way, peace out.